Wednesday, May 18th. Your theme coming up for tomorrow is the Jersey Day, and then Friday is the Field Day. No way. And then, let's see, don't forget to turn in test coming up by Friday. Those of you who don't want to be kicked into the hallway should probably make sure you're not being distracting. So you say we got to the wrestling bit. Talked about the judge scaring the poo out of me. And then got to wrestling coach, and we got to the throwing. Showed you a picture here. Okay. And then
we got to Corey. We got to see Corey.
Did we talk about the throwing dummy?
Yeah.
We left off of this.
So, end of practice. After Corey had spent the entire practice throwing and breaking me into small, tiny little pieces, I was hurting, but I figured, all right, I'm a big boy. It's been bad. I can suck it up. And I remember, like, at the end of practice, I crawled over to the little corner where everyone was gathering together, and the coach did, like, the end of the practice talk. He was like, all right, I think practice went pretty well today. And I was like, uh-huh. He was like, but there's a good chance some of you guys still have some anger that you need to work through, because when people on this team make poor choices, it reflects poorly on everyone on this team. And you probably need to work some of that out. And they were like, uh-huh. He goes, all right, well, I'm going to let you guys work some of this out. All right, gentlemen. And then the coach left and just shut the door. And the entire wrestling team turned and looked at me and smiled. And I was like, oh, poop, this is not good. And the seniors, the oldest kids on the team, came over and grabbed me and dragged me over to the throwing dummy, which was this thing that we use in wrestling that's about 110 pounds. It's about this big, and it's in case you didn't have someone that you could practice throwing, you would use like this big stuffed human-looking thing. And they mat taped me to it. And what mat tape is like really wide, super powerful duct tape that they use to tape these mats together that weigh several thousand pounds. And they taped my arms and legs to this throwing dummy. And then once I was taped to it, they then took turns balancing it up while they would run and then throw themselves like a flying tackle and then hit me. And then I would like, and I'd go flying backwards, and they'd set me up again, run, go flying into me over and over and over again. When they got tired of that, they would then pick me up and like swing me back and forth and then just throw me into the air. And I was like, ah! And I'd land on my face. It was awful. They did this for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes until eventually they got bored of beating the crap out of me. And then when they were done, they just threw me into a corner, upside down, so feet in the air, arms out to the side, head down, and they turned off the lights and left. And just left me in there. I didn't know how long I was going to be there. I didn't know if it was going to be overnight. I didn't know if a custodian was going to come in and release me. I didn't know how long you could be upside down, if I could try to wiggle myself out. I just sat there and went through all of those things in my head about the fact that I deserve this, I brought this upon myself, I'm a piece of trash, and it was awful. At some point, one of my best friends on the team, Eric, had hidden himself in the showers in the locker room and waited for all the upperclassmen to leave, and then snuck back in, and he had a pocket knife that he kept in his backpack back when it wasn't illegal to have pocket knives. And he cut the tape to free me. The problem is I was part bear even as a kid, and so the tape like ended up ripping off all the hair on my arms and legs and balded me, which was awful. And then I ended up like from there I thanked him, and he was like, I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner, but they just kept staying around laughing and making fun of you. And I'm like, okay. And I remember I had to go out, and my mom, who's waiting outside, she's like, what took so long? And I'm like, wrestling practice. I got the crap beat out of me. And she was like, yeah, I told you to be rough. And I'm like, you have no idea. And then I didn't quit the team. Stayed on the team. And after school, whenever we had a meet, instead of going to McDonald's or going to the drugstore, I would just sit in the back hallway and just sit back there and do my homework near like where the gymnasium was. It was very similar to how ours is, where that little back hallway is. I would just sit out there by myself. A couple weeks later, I was sitting in this back hallway, and there was a kid in my grade named Travis. And Travis Booker, was scary. He was in my grade, but he was older than me. He had been held back, I don't know when. He was as close to a greaser as we had. He was the one that wore cowboy boots to school. He reminded me of Tim Shepard from The Outsiders, like that big scary guy. He always had this mullet. I remember in junior high, him getting in trouble for smoking cigarettes at school. He actually got into a fight with a teacher in junior high. I myself never had run-ins with him because I was smart enough to avoid him at all times. I didn't even think he knew who I was, which I was fine with. So this day, I'm sitting in this back hallway waiting for our wrestling meet to start. I'm doing my homework when I hear the clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack of cowboy boots. And very few kids at our school wore cowboy boots. And I looked up to my left down this hallway, and there's Travis just walking down the hallway. And I'm like, well, there's not much I can do about it. We're literally the only two people in this hallway. So I figured if I just ignore him, he'll ignore me, and I can just look down at my little homework I'm doing. And I kept looking at my homework, pretending to do work, and I was like clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. And the feet I could see out of my peripheral vision stopped right in front of me, clickety-clack. And I'm like, well, like an ostrich, if I don't look at you, you can't look at me, and you can't beat me up if we don't make eye contact. At least that's what I was going under. And the feet turned, and they're facing me. And I was like, son of a gun. Okay, well, obviously you're standing in front of me, but I'm still not going to recognize that he's there. I'm going to pretend he doesn't exist for as long as possible. And then he goes, you're Broviac, aren't you? And I'm like, dang it. Well, no more pretending. So I looked up at him, and he didn't look angry. He just looked, I don't know. It's hard to describe the expression. He just looked at me like he was curious. And I was like, yeah, I'm Broviac. We're in the same grade. He went, uh-huh, yeah. And he just looked at me. He goes, you got arrested for stealing breast spray, didn't you? And I was like, seriously, Travis is going to start in on me? That's where we're going. This kid. And I'm like, fine. Let's do this thing. And so I was like, yeah, I did. I stole breast spray. It's really dumb. It's probably one of the worst things I've done. What about it? I figured he's going to lay into me. And I've mentioned before how it's the small things that stick with you. This was one of those small things that stuck with me. Travis just looked at me, and he goes, life sucks right now, doesn't it? And I was like, yeah, it does. And he goes, uh-huh. Yeah, when I was in 7th grade, I stole pencils from a store, and I got caught. And my dad beat the crap out of me, and my friends made fun of me. And it was probably one of the dumbest things I've ever done. I was like, what the heck are you talking about? Like, this is not where I thought this conversation was going at all. And I was like, uh-huh. And he goes, kids at school, man, they made fun of me. It was probably one of the worst times of my life. I was like, okay. And he went, but you know what? After a while, they move on. And they'll find someone else to pick on. So you know what, kid? Stay strong. You do that and you'll get through this. And then he just turned and walked away. One of the weirdest experiences I've ever had in my life. And some of the best advice. And he's right. As evil and awful and malicious as teens can be, you guys also have the attention span of flies. And within a couple weeks, some other kid did something dumb. Exactly. And kids moved on from it. And it was one of those things where within a couple weeks, my big dumb thing was no longer a big dumb thing, and someone else had done a big dumb thing, and that became the thing that everybody focused on. And it was the fact that Travis could have made fun of me. He could have beat me up. I'd never seen this kid do a nice thing in his life. And maybe he did nice things all the time, and it was just people telling rumors about him. I have no idea. But the fact I still tell stories about him today, and the fact that him stopping to be nice and tell me that little thing had a huge impact on me. And so it was just one of those neat little things. So I had to go through all of high school then, not drinking, which seems easy till you get to high school, then you realize how many parties there are, and everyone drinks and does drugs and makes poor choices in high school. And I couldn't. And I lost friends because of it, because I'd have friends who were going to parties, and they would invite me. And I'm like, is there going to be drinking? And they're like, yeah, it's a party. And I'm like, I can't go with you. I'm like, I can't get arrested. That judge scared the crap out of me. And my friends weren't mean. They didn't peer pressure. It was just that they started then hanging out with other kids who went to the parties. And we started hanging out less. And I ended up having to like sort of change my friend group to hang out with kids who did the same things I did. And I ended up making it to my 18th birthday at the end of my senior year and never got in trouble between then and 18. I also didn't drink in high school. I didn't do drugs in high school, partly because of me being scared of the judge and partly because my family was so screwed up, but got through the end of my senior year being a fairly good kid because of it. And to this day, I don't know what kind of kid I would have been in high school if I had not been arrested my freshman year, because I had opportunities to make poor choices. And I wonder if I would have made some of those poor choices if it hadn't been for that arrest that happened. So, I got accepted to IU, down Indiana University down in Bloomington, and I was excited. So I went there beginning of my freshman year. I never went to the police to find out if they got rid of my record. I just assumed I turned 18 and my record was good. I just honestly wasn't brave enough to go into a police station and be like, do I have a criminal record? I just assumed if I never get arrested again, problem solved. Little did I know. So at college, I brought my car down with me, which was this sports car I got when I was in high school. It was a Mazda RX-7. And not a lot of people bring their cars down to IU because you have to have a parking pass to have it on campus. And the only way to get a parking pass is you have to like camp out overnight because they limit how many parking passes are out there. And it's like going to a concert nowadays, and you have to like camp out to get tickets or something. And I camped out and got a parking pass so I could bring my car down with me to campus. But it was not a big car. It was a 2-seat sports car. So you had driver's seat, passenger seat, and there was no back seat. It was just this big flat area for like putting groceries or something like that. And you could put like a few boxes in there. But we were teenagers, and teenagers are dumb. And oftentimes, we would drive around with extra people in the back. Like when I was in high school, my brother wanted to come out to a movie with me and friends, I would drive, my friend would sit in the side seat, and then my younger brother, we'd put him in the back like a big package of groceries. And we would just close him in the back and then close it, and it looked like you were stuck in a fishbowl, because it had like just a big glass back, and he's like, ah, he'd be smashed in there. And then got to college, and ended up having like even more, because I was the only one on my dorm floor that had a car. And so it forced me to be friendly and popular because everyone would come talk to me. Because we didn't have Uber back then. So if they wanted to like go to the grocery, they'd come talk like, Broviac, can you drive me to the grocery? And I'm like, yeah. And I'd charge them gas money, but it was more just I got to meet and talk to people. And I was a shy kid, so this forced me out of my comfort zone, which is the thing I was trying to do, which helped me become the teacher I am today. And so it went pretty well. Freshman year, met a ton of people. We would drive around at times. We ended up at one point getting like 6 people in my car, which is super stupid because it was me driving, and then we had like a person in the passenger seat, and then we had a person sitting in the middle who was like crouched like a little vulture, and we put like 3 people in the back, and we literally had to sit there and like smash on the back of it to get it to close, and I got like little squeaky sounds. It was great. So eventually, around November, one of the guys on the dorm floor that I had met, Mo, was having his birthday, and we were all excited. This was the first person on our dorm floor that we were friends with that was having a birthday at college. And we're like, first college birthday, yay! And so we decided that we were going to throw a party for him. And the guy who was running the party was a guy whose nickname was Fish, because his last name was Fisher, and so we just called him Fish. And so Fish was like, okay, Fish, it was an interesting guy. Fish was the friend, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Jackass, the TV show. Oh my
God, I love that show.
So did Fish. So it gives you an idea of what, and Fish like would act those things out on a regular basis. I remember being at parties with Fish in college, and they would have like a back porch to a house, and he was the one that was like, I bet I can jump off this back porch and hit that little puddle of water. We're like, you probably like, ah, and he would go. We're like, oh my God. And so like he was entertaining but scary at the same time. He would do things you'd be like, oh my God, what is wrong with you? And so Fish was the one that decided to throw this big party. And we're like, all right. And then he goes like, you know what we're going to do? Let's have a beer bash where we're going to bring a whole bunch of beer up there. Problem is, IU is what's called a dry campus. This was our dorm that we lived in, which means you cannot have alcohol anywhere on campus, even if you're over 21. Like me being 46, if I was on the IU campus and I had a beer, I could get arrested for it. So you cannot have beer anywhere. Plus, we lived on the 11th floor of Wilkie. So it means we had to get the beer up all the way back on the elevator or the stairs to the 11th floor, and every floor has what's called an RA, which is basically is a dorm parent who lives on your floor, who's there to make sure you don't become an idiot. So we were going to have to sneak it up the elevator, past the dorm parent, into a room, and then make sure no one could find out about it. Plus, Fish was the one organizing it. It sounded like a complete nightmare. So I decided that I was not going to be there for it. I told the guys on the floor that I had a criminal record. I'm like, hey, I don't drink, got arrested when I was in high school, made poor choices at one point, I don't drink, and they didn't care. Like, there was never peer pressure, they were never mean about it. They were actually pretty excited. They're like, that's cool, you have a history. And I'm like, yeah, I have a history, and my family has problems too. And so, like, it was never an issue with them. So I said, all right, I don't drink beer, and so I'll give you guys money for the beer, but I have this girl I have a crush on named Amy, and there was this school dance. I was like, I'm going to go to the school dance while you guys have the party. That way, when it gets busted, because I knew it was going to get busted because Fish. And so I decided I'll be on the other side of campus, far away from it. I'm a genius. And they're like, all right, not a problem. So I gave them the money, and I was like, you guys have fun. But the party was still a couple weeks away. We get closer. Week of the party. So party's going to be on Friday. This is Tuesday. Fish comes to see me. He's like, Broviak. I'm like, Fish, what's up? He goes, party coming up on Friday. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to be there, remember? I'm going to the dance. He's like, yeah, I know. Here's the thing. I need your help. I'm like, why do you need my help? He goes, so I have a guy to buy beer. This guy named William. William was this random 21-year-old that Fish found. I have no idea how he found this guy. Sketchy as anything. But he was like, I found this 21-year-old. He's going to buy us beer. And I'm like, yeah, have fun with that. Who knows what alley you found this guy in? And he was like, but here's the problem. We don't have a car. Can I borrow your car? The idea of Fish driving my car scared me. Y'all seen Jackass? Same thing, except behind the wheel of a car. And so I was like, there's no way I'm letting you borrow my car, because you're going to go on like 2 wheels and pop a wheelie or jump off a building or something. So I go, not a good idea. My parents would kill me. There's no way I can let you borrow my car. I'm sorry. He's like, well, it doesn't hurt to try. And I'm like, agreed, except you're not getting my car. And he's like, okay. And so I figured that was the end of it. No problem. Friday comes around. Day of the dance, day of the party. I've already given them money. Fish comes back, knocks on my door. He's like, Broviak. I'm like, Fish, what's going on? He goes, hey man, we have a problem. And I'm like, you have a problem? I'm going to a dance. I'm like, what's up? He goes, so I told you about William, right? I'm like, yeah, your friend who's buying the beer. He goes, yeah. He was like, I've asked everybody. He was like, we don't have a car. If you don't let us use your car, he's like, we can't get the beer. And he pulls out this stack of cash that apparently he'd been collecting from people. It was like this huge wad. He was like, look, I've got money so we can go get the beer. And I'm like, good for you. And he had some of my other friends on the dorm floor with him, and they were like all right there. And they were like, listen, and Fish goes, listen, I understand. You don't want me to drive it. How about this? Would you mind driving William around? So you drive it, and then William goes and buys the beer, and then you throw in the back. And I'm like, I don't know this guy. I'm not driving around with some random sketchy dude you're putting in my car. I'm like, that's not happening either. He's like, oh, okay. Here's my next plan. And I'm like, okay. He goes, you drive, William goes with you, and I'll sit in the back. I go, I don't have a back. It's a 2-seater car. He goes, I don't know. I'll just lay down, and I'll just lay in the back. I'm like, well, then where are you putting the beer? And he's like, well, let's put the beer around me. And I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? And all of the other guys were there, and they're like, Broviak, we understand if you don't want to do it, but if you don't do it, then like, there's no party. And if there's no party, like, what are we going to do? They're like, come on, man. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And so I was like, I'm like, I don't want to do this. And I'm like, I know. We wouldn't ask, but we have no other way of getting it done. And I was like, fine. When are we going to do it? And like, as soon as it's dark. And I'm like, fine, I'll do this for you guys, but you owe me. And they're like, we owe you so big. I'm like, you betcha. So we waited until dark. And so dark, am I going to take it from you?
No.
Thank you. So we waited until darkness. It was probably around 6 or 7 o'clock. And I was like, all right, let's go. So the way it works down in Bloomington is you can't even be in the parking lot of a liquor store if you're under 21, because there's no reason to be in a parking lot if you're under 21 unless you're trying to legally get beer. So just being in the parking lot made me nervous. And then to limit underage drinking, they also limit you to only 2 cases of beer at each place you go. So the case of beer is like the big 24, 30 packs, which meant we were going to have to drive around to a whole bunch of different places. So I had planned ahead, and I had this big blanket in the back of my car so we could throw it over the beer. And we start driving around. And we're going from like one grocery store to a liquor store to another liquor store to a grocery store. And every time I'm just sitting in the driver's seat, and William would get out and he'd go running inside. He'd come out with the 2 cases and throw them into the back of the car, and we'd throw the blanket over it, and we'd drive to the next one. And it starts getting more and more crowded, where it's just this big open hatchback area. And we start filling it in with fish who's curled into a ball behind a seat, and then all of these cases of beer. And it started getting to the point where the back of my car was getting lower and lower to the ground. So I remember as we drove, every time we hit like a curb exiting a parking lot, my car would go bang, and sparks would shoot out the side. And I'm like, listen, we are going to get pulled over because at some point a police officer is going to see the fact that my car looks like it's popping a wheelie and something bad is going to happen. So we have to be done. I'm like, all right, just a couple more. So eventually I told them we have to be done. I was freaking out. I was sweating, nervous, shaking. And I was like, that's it. I can't do anymore. And they're like, all right, we got enough. So we drove back to my dorm. So we get to Wilkie, and I remember we parked right about where this silver car is in the parking lot, although the parking lot was full of cars. And so I parked facing this direction with like the back of it opening right here. And so we had to get the beer from here all the way to here where the elevator was, and then up the elevator down to our dorm floor. And so they brought this giant hockey bag, which is like a duffel bag for hockey gear. It's humongous. Like you could fit bodies inside of it. And they started putting all the beer into the back of it. And I was helping them, like opening up the cases and dumping the beer into it. And I just got nervous and more nervous. I was freaking out. And I had an idea. I'm like, how about I go up to the dorm floor and I get the other guys? Because that way we spread it out. We didn't have, this was before cell phones, so we couldn't just like call them. You had to physically walk places like cavemen. And I was like, I'll go up there to the dorm floor and I'll get the other guys, and then they can come down with a bunch of different bags and we can spread it out. And they're like, oh, that's a good idea. And I'm like, yeah, because it gets me far away from the beer. So how about I go up there because I'm a genius? And they're like, you would do that? And I'm like, yeah, love you guys. And so they kept packing stuff into the duffel bags, and I left. I'm like, perfect, I am getting away from them. Got right about there. And so I was going down this big long sidewalk that goes to the back of the dorm where the elevator was. And there were people out walking around because it's college dorm on like a Friday night. So there's every once in a while I see people walking around. As I was coming down, from my left, just walking across the grass, I hear these 2 voices, and they go, hey, wait up a minute. I figure, oh, this is 2 of my friends who are out walking. And I go, yeah. And I look over, and it's 2 police officers just walking across. I'm like, what are the freaking chances? So I don't stop. I just keep walking. And they're like, hold up a minute. I'm like, yeah, what's going on? As I just keep walking. And they're like, we got a question. And I'm like, yeah, what's your question? As I'm walking farther and farther away from the car. But I'm getting loud so that my friends can hear me back at the car. And so the police officers are like, you live here? I'm like, yeah, that's my dorm up there. As I keep going, and they turned on their flashlights. Bing, bing, like, ah. And I stop, I'm like, what? And they go, well, how'd you get here? And I'm like, I drove. Like, into the parking lot? I'm like, yeah. Ah. And I realized, probably shouldn't have said anything. And they go, oh, can we see your car? My guess is they'd probably already seen me in the parking lot, and they saw me running, and they decided to intercept me. I had to guess, looking back on it now. And I go, sure, because it's a parking lot. I figure there's not much I can do. I can't say no. It's a public area. You can look at my car. And I go, sure. And they go, all right, we're going to go look at your car. And I'm like, I guess I got to come with you. Now, I had been speaking loudly so that Fish and the 21-year-old could hear what was going on. So luckily, they had quickly thrown all the beer back into the car and taken the blanket and thrown it over everything and then slammed the back of my car shut. But again, giant fishbowl glass bubble. So you could see straight into it, blanket covering big lumpy something. Plus, that was all the time they had to do. So when the police officers took their flashlights from me to them, they quickly just leaned on the back of the car in that nonchalant, I'm definitely not doing anything illegal while you're looking over here kind of way. And the police officers shined their light on them and they were like, hey. And I'm just like, oh God. And so we end up walking up there and I'm like walking behind the police officers. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And we get up to the car and the police officers go, hey gentlemen. And they're like, officers? And they walk up there, they shine their lights into the back of my car. And you can see blanket covering large lumpy something. And they go, gentlemen, what's in the car? Me being the witty person I am, I go, car stuff. I'm a genius. And they go, oh, can we see your car stuff? I haven't thought that part through. But I have seen cop shows. And I go, no. Because I don't want them to see the cop stuff or the car stuff. And they go, oh, we'd really like to see the car stuff. Can you open it up so we can see it? And I go, no, because I've not seen that many cop shows, and I don't know how long I can keep saying no. And they go, well, we're going to give you two options. And I go, uh-huh. They go, option one, you go ahead and unlock the back of the car and pull back the blanket and show us your car stuff. And I went, option two? Because I know where option one goes. I don't like option one, so let's take the other option. And they go, option two, we're going to sit on the back of the car, and what we're going to do is call the tow truck company, and the tow truck company is going to come and tow your car down to the police station, and then we're going to have a locksmith come out and pop the lock on your car, and then we're going to pull back the blanket, because we have reason to believe that this is fairly suspicious, and whatever is underneath there might not be car stuff. And if we pull back the blanket, and it is car stuff, we will apologize, and we'll bring your car back to you. But if it's not car stuff, then we're going to come back here, we're going to come up to your dorm, and we're going to arrest you in front of all of your friends. And then you're going to have to pay for the tow truck, you're going to pay for the locksmith, and you're going to pay for all the court costs. Which option would you like? And I'm like, well, option one, I get arrested. Option two, I get arrested, and pay a whole bunch of fees on top of it. I'm like, both options involve me getting arrested, but at least this one is cheaper. So I decided to go, okay, I'll unlock it. So I pull out my key, and I pop it, and I step back. And I keep telling you, it's the little things that stick with you. I step back, and both police officers step over, and they lift up the little back to my car, and they threw back the blanket.
Oh my God.
And at the same time, both officers went, damn, that's a lot of beer. Now, I know that comment is not followed by, you're free to go. Like, those two things don't go, that's a lot of beer, have a good night, children. So I knew it was not going to go my way. So the police officers turned to look at the three of us, and they go, gentlemen, whose car is this? I honestly considered not claiming my car and just being like, I don't know, we just found it, you guys can have it, and then walking away. But I thought that would be tough to explain to my parents if my car was gone. That's a hard one to hide. So I went, that's my car. And they go, your car? And I went, yes. So they turned to look at Fish and the 21-year-old. And they go, gentlemen, you're free to go. Because the way the law works at it is, whoever owns the car owns what's in the car. I own the car, I own the beer. And Fish and the 21-year-old went, really? And they went, unless you want to stay. And they took off like cartoon characters. Dust came shooting out, and they ran. And the police officer read me my rights, did the whole handcuffy thing, handcuffs behind my wrists. I had to sit down on the little curb that was next to my car. I remember sitting there, and I'm looking up at my dorm floor, trying to figure, I'm like, are you kidding me? I even told the officers, like, officers, I don't drink. And they go, that's a lot of beer for someone who doesn't drink. And I'm like, well, it's not for me. And they go, doesn't matter, son. That's your car. And I was like, ah! And I remember as I'm sitting there like looking up at my dorm floor, I was watching all the lights turn on my dorm floor. It's like ding, 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 ding. And then little faces kept pressing against it because that's what friends do. They watch you get arrested. And so my friends were up there watching me get arrested. And I remember they would sit there and wave at me because they thought it was hilarious. I tried to wave back, but I could only get one finger. Not that one. And so I waved back at them as best I could. And then the police eventually came, and a police car pulled up and moved all the beer from my car to the police car, and they drove me to the police station. I did the fingerprinting thing. I got fingerprinted. I did the picture thing where you have to hold the thing and stand in front of the wall and you get the picture. And I would show you the picture, but I don't have it because by the time I started telling this story, the picture was gone and they'd already deleted it or whatever they did with those pictures anymore. Today, I would happily show you a picture of sad 18-year-old me standing there holding a thing. I think it'd be hilarious. So you'll just have to use your imagination on that one. And then being 18, they don't call your parents because you're legally an adult. So after they fingerprinted me and did the picture, they're like, well, we're going to send you stuff in the mail and you'll have to go to court or whatever it is. And then they just let me go. And then that was it. The problem was I was at the police station and my car was on the other side of town at my dorm. And we didn't have Uber yet. So I had to walk 3 miles across town in the middle of the night to get back to my car, which sucked.
What did they do with the beer?
I'm assuming they all drank it. I'm assuming, yeah, I'm thinking it went into evidence too. And they were like, well, that kid was a big fat dum-dum. So, problem is, I had to tell my parents at some point what happened to me. So, I waited till Thanksgiving, which was a couple weeks later. And at Thanksgiving, I got together with my mom and my stepdad, and I was like, hey, I kind of need to tell you something. They're like, what's going on? I'm like, so, a couple weeks ago, I got arrested again.
Why did you say it on Thanksgiving?
And they were like, shoplifting? And I'm like, no, not shoplifting. I've expanded my boundaries. And they're like, what's going on? I was like, well, I was picked up for possession of alcohol. And they're like, possession of alcohol? I'm like, yeah, turns out I had a little over 330 cans of beer in the back of my car, which is, as the police officer said, a lot of beer. And my parents go, oh, that's a lot of beer. I'm like, well, it was for a party. And my mom then goes, so how long have you been drinking? And I go, well, I don't drink. I'm like, I still don't drink. I never have. And she goes, hon, we can't get you help until you admit you have a problem. And I went, I don't have a problem. I'm like, I was just dumb. My mom goes, hon, no one is that dumb. Like, you can't have that much beer in your car and not drink. My parents did not believe that I did not drink. And eventually we had to call my friends on Thanksgiving, I went to high school with, my parents knew, who were also going to IU, and they made my friends come over Thanksgiving night, and they interrogated my friends in a separate room. They made me leave and sat them down at the kitchen table, and they're like, how long has our son been drinking? They're like, he doesn't drink. Like, he got arrested with alcohol. I'm like, oh, he's just an idiot. And I remember, like, eventually they convinced my mom, and her coming out of the room going, oh, thank God, hon, you're just a moron. And I'm like, thanks, Mom. So glad I could make you proud. And so, yeah, I had to deal with that.
That must suck.
The other issue is the government doesn't care if you drink or not. If you're underage and you get arrested for alcohol possession, you go to rehab. And so at 18, I went to rehab for 5 weeks.
Never have
That's sick.
Yeah.
You went to rehab.
So like, did you